Welcome to the REN webinar on pedagogical collaborations in the neighborhood. My name is Pomme Woltman, and I'm a member of the team coordinating the REN Practitioners Network. For those of you who do not know REN Practitioners yet, the REN Practitioners is a network for frontline practitioners who work daily with both those who are vulnerable to radicalization and those who have already been radicalized. As civil society representatives, social workers, youth workers, teachers, healthcare professionals, local authority representatives, police officers, and prison officers, they are engaged in both preventing and countering violent extremism in all its forms and rehabilitating and reintegrating violent extremists. The REN organizes a number of thematic working groups for frontline practitioners so that they may share their extensive knowledge, firsthand experiences and approaches with each other, and they can also peer review each other's work. REN also produces a series of publications which are shared with its network, which both highlight the lessons learned, insight and recommendations from those working group meetings, and consolidate REN's knowledge and expertise. Yeah, so that's about REN practitioners in a nutshell. Today's webinar will aim to answer the following two questions that you can also see now in your screen. So what barriers can we identify and do we need to overcome to improve collaboration between youth work, education, and other actors with pedagogical influence? And which steps should be taken to establish this collaboration? So at the beginning of 2021, the REN working group Youth and Education, this working group is for youth workers and for teachers or other educational staff. The working group organized a working session on pedagogical collaboration where the participating youth workers and teachers applied the model of the Peaceable Foundation to their own situation and context. And this working session was highly valued by all the participants, and that gave rise to the organization of this webinar, where we are able to disseminate the know-how of the Peaceable neighborhood even further. So first, before I give the floor to the speaker of today, some practicalities and the house rules. The webinar will take approximately 90 minutes. And even though only our speakers of today, Dennis de Vries and Ellen Fraser, and myself, will be using our microphones and cameras, we will leave enough opportunity for you as participants to ask questions. And to ask a question, please use the Q&A section only. At the end of the webinar, we will have time to answer a selection of these questions. And in the Q&A section, you can see which questions have already been asked, and you can like each other's question. And by doing so, you will help us to decide which questions are most important and relevant to answer. Additionally, the webinar will be recorded and an edited version will be uploaded on the REN media channels afterwards. And in the recording, your questions will not be visible, so only what is said and presented on the screen will be recorded. And at the end of the webinar, when you close the window, you will get a pop-up in which you will be asked to fill in our short survey about this webinar. And we would very much appreciate your feedback so we can use this to improve the future REN webinars. But this will come at the end. This will be clear. Yeah, now a short introduction of the speaker of today, who is the expert joining us today, and he will present and explain his work for the Peaceable Foundation. Dennis Dennis de Vries, and he's the director of the Peaceable Foundation in the Netherlands and the co-chair of the REN working group on youth and education. And the other expert of today is one of the participants of last year's meeting on this topic, Alan Fraser. He's the director of the Cranford Community College in the UK, and he will share his experiences regarding collaborations in the neighborhood in and around his school also with us today. Yeah, that's it. Dennis, I give the floor to you.
Okay, well, thank you, Pomme, and thank you for the introduction. I want to tell a little bit more about myself. Indeed, I'm the director of the Peaceable Foundation here in the Netherlands, and I have a background in education. So I started as a teacher in the city of Utrecht, and I will tell you some more examples about that city later on. And later on, I worked also as a principal at a primary school. So at the moment, I'm very busy with the Peaceable neighborhood, and I will give you some examples of it later on. But I wanted to start with a Mentimeter because I'm very curious about who is in the room today. Because if you look at this topic, it is really a diverse topic because it is really about collaboration in the neighborhood, and there are all kinds of stakeholders or partners in that neighborhood, like the local municipality officers, police officers, youth workers, teachers, of course, parents, and many more. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to share it again for the Mentimeter. Let's see. I think you can see it in your screen now. So my question would be, go to menti.com, maybe on your telephone, and fill in the code and fill in your role. So are you a youth worker, or are you here as a teacher or a police officer, or someone from a local municipality, or maybe a health professional or a sports teacher or other? Well, we don't have interaction right now at the moment, but of course I'm very curious about the other persons. And indeed, it is a very diverse environment if you talk about the neighborhood. So a youth worker, okay, welcome. Health professional. So as you can see over here, also the audience of today is very diverse. And I think that's also, if you look at the community and the neighborhood, I think that's also the biggest question: how to cope with that broad diversity and how to work together with a pedagogical vision. So later on this webinar, I will give of course a lot of examples: 2 youth workers and 3 other. Maybe those are persons who are involved with policy, I guess, but also a teacher. So indeed, also today a very diverse group. Health professionals. And I think this is a main challenge if it comes to collaboration, because a lot of the times you're very busy with your own work, for example, as a teacher, but your students, they live in the neighborhood, so they are also involved in the sports clubs or at a local youth house where there's a youth worker, for example. So that will be the main question of today. So I'm going to share my presentation again. And indeed, as I expected, a lot of diversity also in this group. Yes, okay, we're back again. So the main challenge today is really about how to strengthen that pedagogical cooperation in the neighborhood with all those different stakeholders. And I hope we can work on that goal. And today I'm going to give a lot of examples from my own work in the city of Utrecht, in the neighborhood of Overvecht. And I want to start by sharing a video of the city of Overvecht with an example of how we work on polarization, but also radicalization in the neighborhood, and how we do that with all kinds of stakeholders and partners. Let's see. Can't get to my video right now. Let's see. Sorry, I'm going to try to share my screen again. Edge. Yes, here it is. I think you can see it over right now.
We just don't have the sound, Dennis.
It's coming.
Okay.
The unrest spread after a nationwide curfew was applied during the COVID lockdown. All major cities suffered from riots. All except this one, Utrecht. Utrecht was spared mainly because of the efforts undertaken by PNCV practitioners in the city. I decided to come out here to discover how. Utrecht is a university town of around 360,000 people, famed for its medieval center. But just a few miles away, the city looks markedly different. So I'm here in Overvecht, an area in the south of Utrecht, and I've come to meet Hannah Hadouche, a youth worker who can tell me a bit more about this area. Overvecht is an area of around 30,000 people, with a variety of challenging issues. Hannah Hadouche has been a youth worker here for 13 years.
Goedemorgen.
So people in this area must know you, right?
Ja, zeker. Ik bedoel, iemand die 13 jaar, ooit was ik met 24 uur per week en nu werk ik echt 36 uur per week. En ja, tuurlijk. En ik ben natuurlijk ook veel op social media, dus iedereen, ik denk dat ik iedereen wel ken. Maar dat heb je al een beetje gezien, hè? Ik ken ook echt wel.
It's clear that Hannah enjoys a rich level of trust within this community.
Goed.
Hannah also spends a large percentage of her job talking to and interacting with young people online.
Ik heb geluk, want ik heb 6 jaar geleden wist ik al, online wereld gaat de wereld overnemen. Dus ik zit al 6 jaar lang, zit ik op alle social media kanalen. Ik volg alle jongeren volgen mij. Dus ik had gelijk een connecting met de jongeren.
In summer 2020, there was unrest across Utrecht, including in Overvecht.
Jongeren waren het zat, er waren geen feesten, er waren geen sociale contacten, er was niets meer. Dus toen hebben ze via social media, hebben ze voor de grap, het was echt voor de grap, zo van kom laten we met z'n allen bij elkaar komen. Toen is het zeg maar geëscaleerd. En vooral omdat jongeren eigenlijk dingen deden waar zij niet mee dachten dat de impact zo groot was.
The local authorities reacted immediately and unequivocally.
Wat heeft de gemeente Utrecht heel goed gedaan? Heel goed. Die heeft samengewerkt met de politie, het jongerenwerk, de gemeente zelf. En ze hebben goed bekeken van hoe heeft dit kunnen gebeuren. Er zijn gewoon heel veel bijeenkomsten geweest, heel veel evaluaties en ook conclusies voor het geval als dit weer zou gebeuren. Wat gaan we dan inzetten? Dus zoals ze in het Engels zeggen, they were prepared. Wij als jongerenwerkers hebben een ontzettend grote taak gekregen. Dat we dus moesten laten zien, jongeren, we zijn er voor jullie. Dus we hebben heel veel activiteiten gedaan. De gemeente Utrecht heeft daar goed over meegedacht. Vooral ook op het financieel gebied. De politie die ook gewoon op de activiteiten kwam. Dus hier in Overvecht zijn we vreedzaam nu door goed samen te werken.
The riots in the Netherlands in January 2021 were encouraged, publicized and spread through social media platforms. But in Utrecht, the network was prepared. So when these the so-called curfew riots happened in the Netherlands, did you pick up any signals that it could happen here in Utrecht or Overvecht?
Ja, dat zie je op social media, zie je dat allemaal voorbij komen. En dan zeggen ze ook een locatie, we gaan vandaag naar Overvecht, we gaan naar Kanaaleiland, we gaan naar daar.
Hannah took me to a local school to find out how these online and offline networks reacted as events unfolded.
Leiders, laat ik zo maar zeggen, is van kijk uit, er is wel heel veel op social media.
The youth is bored. Because of the curfew, we can't hang out past 9. And there was calls on social media to riot.
Het is wat we deden, echte gesprekken aan met de jongens. Met de mentoren van onze leerlingen, van hij praat met de leerlingen, heb je die signalen, horen jullie wat? Laten we samen even bij elkaar komen.
Wij zijn continu goed aan het luisteren, aan het kijken, oké, maar waarom doen jongeren dit? En we zijn continu met hun in gesprek gegaan van oké, wat hebben jullie nodig? Wat willen jullie? En ze hebben ook hun geadviseerd van doe maar gewoon even niet, want het is een strafbaar feit.
What kind of partners did you involve in the process?
Zeker met de politie. En samenwerken met de politie wil niet zeggen dat wij onze jongeren snatchen of wat dan ook.
What I've heard from my friends that the police through the years they actually want to connect more with us.
En wanneer wij met de politie zitten, dan praten we weer van hey, wat gaan we doen? Dat onze jongeren niet tot straat op gaan om in de aanraking te komen met de rellen wat in de andere steden aan de gang is.
They're really talking to us. If they see youth on the street, they're coming to have a talk with us. So the trust is improving. Yeah, it's becoming more.
Uit de rol van ouders, moet je niet vergeten de ouders die ook actief zijn in de wijk, ook in de moskeeën. Ik ben heel actief in het gebied van...
We hebben allemaal groepsappen met ouders erin, met andere professionals. En we waren continu in communicatie. Ook 's avonds laat, 's ochtends vroeg, continu in communicatie, continu met elkaar in verbinding.
NA explained how this network operates so effectively across the whole city.
Ze zeggen, we hebben de stad Utrecht doet de overview. En de stad Utrecht is het stukje veiligheid. En veiligheid, de stad Utrecht zegt we moeten samenwerken met politie. En we moeten samenwerken met de professionals. En de professionals, dan heb je het over jongerenwerk, jeugdwerkers. En die drie zorgen ervoor dat niks gaat ontglippen. Dus we kaderen alles af. En dat betekent wel, op dat moment... flexibiliteit, dat iedereen moet bereikbaar zijn. Van oké, als over een uur ergens iets gebeurt met z'n allen daar naartoe, dat we eigenlijk alles gaan kaderen. Dat er eigenlijk geen ruimte is voor rellen.
What could other European cities or youth workers learn from this approach?
Sta dicht bij de jongeren en ga niet pas ingrijpen wanneer dingen fout gaan. Zorg ervoor dat je in de vroeg proces überhaupt gewoon contact met ze hebt. En dat is ook vreedzaam werken. En je hebt het zelf gezien. Begin elkaar te groeten. Ga elkaar leren kennen dat wanneer er ingegrepen moet worden, dat er een relatie is. Dan incasseren ze ook dat je aangesproken wordt. Want ze kennen jou en ze weten dat je het beste voor ze wilt. Ik kan niet zomaar iemand als ik jou niet ken, kan ik jou niet aanspreken.
Als je samenwerkt en je bent ook open, je staat er open om samen te gaan werken en transparant zijn. Ik denk dat we heel veel kunnen bereiken en dat hebben we echt gezien in Utrecht. Het is wel gelukt. En daar zijn we heel trots op.
Well, thank you so much for allowing me to join you today and to follow you around Overvecht. I wish you all the best in the future and let's continue with this great work. It's been eye-opening coming to Utrecht and to Overvecht specifically. No, it's not perfect. There are still many issues that need to be solved. But the way that online and offline are integrated and the way that these agencies work together in building trust, it's definitely a good example of proactive prevention at its best.
So now we had a quick view in the city of Utrecht, in the neighborhood of Overvecht. And let's skip back to my presentation. Let's see. Yes, we're back again. So the way we work together in Overvecht, as you could see in the video, we call it a peaceful cooperation. So the focus is really about prevention if it comes to radicalization. And if you look at our working group Youth and Education within the RAN, we often make use of this model of the prevention pyramid by Johan de Klerk. And if you look at this model, the aim of today, if it comes to cooperation with all those different stakeholders in the community, is really about level one. So improving the quality of life in the living environment, and maybe also a bit level two, general prevention measures. So the focus in the city of Utrecht, and also if you look at the peaceful education in that city, the peaceable neighborhood and the peaceable schools, is really about prevention. So and if you look at that program, the Peaceable School and the Peaceable Neighborhood, it is a program that is evolved around working on democratic practice places in the neighborhood. So if you look at education, for example, there's a big focus on how to do that in the right way. So how do we give young people or young children a voice and let them know that they can improve their school or improve their classroom and that they can play a role in it, but also how to solve conflicts in a peaceful way, for example, or how to cope with the big variety if it comes to diversion in your neighborhood. And it is really a broad program. So schools are involved, youth workers, police officers, and like Hannah mentioned in the video, we are trying to create a shared language, for example, the Peaceable language, but also shared symbols, as you can see over here. So we have shared symbols, shared language, and also a shared mythology. So we use the same methods if it comes to prevention of radicalization. So as in the video that you can see, there's a lot of parties who work together in the collaboration in the neighborhood. But well, we already work with that program for now like 22 years. So and in those years, well, it is not naturally. If you look at a lot of neighborhoods, for example, here in the Netherlands, but I also think in different countries in the EU, there are a lot of partners who try to work in the neighborhood. If you look at youth work, education, but sometimes in the neighborhood, they are really busy with their own assignment or tasks and not really focused on collaboration. So the aim of today is to build upon a framework that makes it more easy to work on collaboration. And we are trying to look at different phases if it comes to that collaboration. So the first phase or stage in the community often could be that there are loose parties in the neighborhood. So every organization works from their own vision and they are doing their own activities separate from each other in the neighborhood. They have their own fundings. They do not work with each other. They maybe sometimes do not even know that there is another organization who is doing the same thing in the neighborhood, or they do not work with each other. So that can be the phase in the neighborhood. So what can you do if that is the cause in your neighborhood? I think the first thing that you can do is really look at your neighborhood and trying to make a social map of the neighborhood. So get to know the neighborhood and also get to know the area and the partners who are active in that area. So from my example, the most easy thing to do is start with the schools, because every neighborhood, there are schools in every neighborhood, and often those schools, they work together with partners in the neighborhood. So maybe a good starting point is to work together or from a school. But of course, there are a lot of partners who are involved if it comes to working with youth. So try to think about those partners. So maybe there is a sports association or club, maybe there's youth work or a church, or maybe police. And of course, you can also try to think about what does it take to bring these parties together. So, and I think the first thing is get to know each other a bit better. So like Hannah mentioned before in the video, the first thing is you have to get to know each other by name, by person. So the first thing I think is to make contact with that other professional or parent in the neighborhood. And then if you do that in the right way, you can come to phase 2. And in phase 2, the parties, they already know each other, maybe for a bit. You know each other by name, or maybe you know which kind of organizations are active in the neighborhood. So then you can form a chain. You know who is active, and also maybe you can try to organize a meeting where you can talk with each other and get to know each other a bit better. So if you want to do that in phase 2, I think it's good to know that what is the target group, because if it comes to youth, there's a big range if it comes to youth. Are we talking about young children, primary education, secondary education, or both? And another question that you can ask yourself or the other partners in the neighborhood is also, what is your pedagogical vision? Because sometimes, for example, if it comes to radicalization, there's a safety part. So if you look at the police, for example, as an organization, they really play a big role in the safety part, but there's also a prevention part. If you look at schools maybe, or youth workers, and sometimes they can have a very different pedagogical vision if it comes to their field of work. So if you look at young people in the neighborhood, maybe a police officer has another pedagogical vision if you compare that with a teacher, for example. So what is your pedagogical vision, and how can we work together from your pedagogical vision? But also, what is the culture of your organization? Again, if you compare the police officer with a youth worker, sometimes they come from a very different organization, and also there can be a very different culture in that organization. So of course, police officers, they are more involved if it comes to criminality, crime, radicalization. So sometimes the culture in that organization can be more tough or more hard, as you can say. And sometimes youth workers or teachers at schools, they have another kinds of organization. So it can be maybe more gentle or more soft in a way. And it's also good to investigate what is the goal of your organization. So is it really about prevention indeed? Try to prevent radicalization, or to handle when there is radicalization. So what are the different interests of all those stakeholders? And last, try to also know the different activities. So of course, a sports teacher in the neighborhood can have a different task or role if you compare that with a teacher or a youth worker, or indeed a police officer. So it's really about get to know each other a bit better. And if you do that the right way, then of course the different partners in the neighborhood, they can keep their own color. But again, you can try to speak the same pedagogical language if you have that vision. So if it comes to, like you saw before, the peaceful neighborhood, we are trying to have the same pedagogical language, and it is really in language, it is in words. So for example, a big compliments play the compliments, giving each other compliments. So work on a positive climate in the neighborhood plays a big role if it comes to the peaceable neighborhood. And we have a word for that. We call it in Dutch, of course, opstekers. And all those different partners in the neighborhood, they use exactly that same word, opsteker. And that really works if you work with children, that you have the same pedagogical language, and not only language, but also structures with your activity. So every activity in the peaceable neighborhood, but also in a peaceable school, we are starting the activity with a warming up. In Dutch, we call it binnenkomer, also a really specific word for that. And we start with a warming up. And they do the same thing if it comes to youth workers, but also if it comes to safety meetings, or if it comes to school meetings. We always start, like we say in Dutch, with a binnenkomer. So if you look at phase 3, what can you do? I think you have to search about how can we make this common language visible. So there is a thing with shared language, but there's also a thing if it comes to visibility. So how, if you look at the visibility in the neighborhood, the schoolyard maybe, but maybe also other places where young people come, of course, the streets. How can we make this also visible? And as you can see over here, it is also about visibility in symbols. So and if you look at that visibility, you also have to think with all those different partners together about what is needed to carry out that a common vision. So you can talk about it, of course, but I think it's also good to organize meetings, for example, if it comes to a common vision. And another thing is, what does that mean if we are talking about a common vision with a shared pedagogical language and shared pedagogical goals? What does that mean for the organization of those different partners in the neighborhood, because some organizations are really about top down, and for a youth worker can be owner of the way how he works in the neighborhood, but some other organization can be really about top down. So is it a top down organization when the manager is in the lead, or is it a bottom up organization where the practitioner is in the lead? So that can be very different, of course. And also a question you have to ask yourself and the different partners is, how do we deal with resistance? Because of course we call it peaceful in the Netherlands, and I think you can't be against a peaceful school or a peaceful neighborhood. But if you look at the different neighborhoods or different things in the neighborhoods, of course, there's always resistance. So if you look at, for example, the peaceful school and the peaceful neighborhood, sometimes the resistance is really about, like I mentioned before, there's a safety part, but there's also a prevention part. And sometimes police officers, they can say, oh, the peaceful neighborhood, it is really too soft. You just have to be harder in the neighborhood. And sometimes youth, they have to be punished, for example. So how do we deal with resistance and how to cope with that, with all those different partners? So if you look at that shared language and shared visibility, here you can see it, how we do it in a peaceful neighborhood. So it's really about shared symbols. As you can see in the middle, the symbol of the peaceful neighborhood, it's a globe with people around it, different people from the neighborhood. But it's also, like I mentioned before, the language. So a compliment, we say opsteker in Dutch, a typical peaceful word. And there's also, as you can see in the middle, a symbol next to it. So it is in language, but also in symbols. So if you walk around a school, you can see all those kinds of symbols. But it's also in how do we work with shared methods. So for example, if you want to solve a conflict, you have to take some certain steps to solve that conflict in a peaceful way. So we have some steps, and we educate children and also educators in the neighborhood how to do that in the right way. And you can see that in your screen on the right. So the first step, it's in Dutch, but the first step is you have to stop if there is violence or if you have a conflict. And the second step is just cool down. You have to cool down, because if you are cool, if that's okay, then you can search together for a good solution. So children, they know the symbols, they know the steps, how to do that in the right way. And the next thing, of course, is also to make it visible in the neighborhood. So if you do that in the right way, then you can come to phase 4, and then there is really a strong common pedagogical goal, but also those different partners, they rally around that common pedagogical goal. So they want to invest in it, and they all can do that, of course, within their own organization. So if you look at the Peaceable neighborhood, there are a lot of different organizations in those neighborhoods. And of course, they have their own structure, as you can say. So, but if you have a shared common goal, then it's more easy to work from your organization on that shared pedagogical goal. So what can you do? Of course, you have to involve all those partners in how do we search for a common goal. And the way how we do it in a peaceful neighborhood is that every peaceful neighborhood has its own coordinator in that neighborhood. And often that is someone who is involved as a youth worker or a social worker. And he or she has a role in the neighborhood to bring all those parties together and to search for a common goal, and also involve them in how to work on that common goal. But also, if there is a common goal, of course, you have to organize joint interventions. So are we still on the same page? How do we have to act when we aren't on the same page? And what are the themes or problems in this neighborhood or environment? So I think the coordinator, if you look at in these kind of processes, plays a big part, because if I look at the Peaceable neighborhood, sometimes organizations are so busy with their own tasks as a youth worker or police officer or teacher, then they are not committed to that common goal. So a coordinator plays a big role in it. And of course, the local municipality can play a big role in it also to make that possible, or to invest in a coordinator in that neighborhood. So if you look at also, again, the Peaceable neighborhood, we are trying to structure it. So if you look at that common goals, we are trying to structure that in a model, as you can say. And in this model, again, it is in Dutch, but I will translate it. There are 4 pillars. So the first pillar is how to work on a positive social climate in the neighborhood. The second pillar is how to act when there is a conflict. So how to work with mediation in the neighborhood. The third pillar is how to make children responsible not only for their own behavior, but also for the common goals in the neighborhood. And the fourth pillar is how to cope with diversity. And in all those pillars, neighborhoods, they are trying to work on different activities to strengthen those pillars. So they're in the whole of the Netherlands, all those neighborhoods, they work from these 4 pillars. But of course, every neighborhood is different. There are different people living in the neighborhood. There are different organizations, and they work differently if you look at those pillars. But of course, in every neighborhood, they work on strengthening the positive social climate in the neighborhood. In all those neighborhoods, they are trying to strengthening the mediation in the neighborhood. So of course, there are things we share together with all those neighborhoods. And if you do that in the right way, then you can end up in phase 5. So then the parties are also willing to give up something for the benefit of that common goal. So not only work from your own organizational perspective, but also organize things maybe with other partners in the neighborhood. Or for example, one of the things we do in the Peaceable neighborhood, if you look at that mediation process, is we work with neighborhood mediators. So those are young people or maybe parents who get trained in mediation, and they do that in the neighborhood. But of course, with all those different organizations in the neighborhood, everybody has his own task. So I was a teacher, but I also felt the urge to add something towards that common goal. So as a teacher, it was also my role to educate all those mediators in the neighborhood. And of course, there were also parents or children involved from other schools. But that's, I think, the main challenge. You're not working from your own perspective or from my school, but you're trying to work from out a neighborhood perspective. So all those children and all those parents, they are our children and our parents. So as a partner in a neighborhood, you have to play a role in it, and not only from your own organizational perspective. So what can you do if it comes to the collaboration? I think you have to investigate together, how do you want to contribute to as a partner to the common pedagogical goal. And there are many forms in it, like I mentioned before. Maybe something if it comes to neighborhood mediation, but there are also all kinds of other things. But also which kind of joint activities can we take up together. And I want to give an example of a neighborhood. In this neighborhood, children, they from all kinds of different schools, they are working with a children's council, so neighborhood children's council or committee, and they are working on a manifesto. And after that manifesto, they are working on some school actions to improve their neighborhood. So children, they play a big part in it, but also all those different partners in the neighborhood. So of course, the schools play a role in it to organize elections in the schools, but also to organize all those school actions. But also youth workers, social workers, they play a role in how to work with that children's council and to organize the children's council. So all those different partners, they play a role in it. And I want to give a short example.
Wil je weten waarom de kinderraad zo leuk en leerzaam is? Wij laten het zien. Er zijn echte verkiezingen.
Dingen waarin de kinderraad niet zien, dat zijn er meer.
Dus, dat wordt heel spannend voor ze.
Vandaag is de dag van de verkiezing en we zijn nu bij het OPSO Vecht. Vandaag gaat de bank op dreef en bij dreef gaan we vandaag stemmen of wie ze het best vindt. De 2 kinderen die de meeste stemmen hebben, komen bij de kinderraad. Ik heb gestemd op deze persoon, omdat hij goed heeft verteld waarom hij het wilde worden. En ik denk ook dat hij het goed kan. Ik heb op deze persoon gestemd, omdat die geen goede activiteiten wil organiseren. Wij hebben geteld en is geworden Unrest en Peaceable. Ik dacht heel leuk dat ik gekozen ben, omdat ik heel veel ideeën nog heb. 2. We hebben vergaderingen waar we samenkomen met kinderraden van andere scholen. Tijdens de vergaderingen bespreken we wat we gaan doen. Kinderraad is vreedzaam. Dat betekent dat we ons inzetten voor een betere en veilige wijk. 3. We mogen zelfs acties bedenken om de wijk leuker en gezelliger te maken en we worden daarbij geholpen. Activiteiten die we gaan doen is een poster maken voor Stop Pesten en met Jans gewoon speeddaten. Het thema buren was goed bij Vreedzame Wijk. Het is belangrijk om je buren leren kennen, omdat je kan, als je iets bijvoorbeeld nodig hebt, dan kan je ook vragen aan de buren. En als je eenzaam bent, kun je ook op visite komen bij je buren en zo. 4. We presenteren onze plannen bij de stedelijke kinderraad in het stadhuis. We gaan zo meteen debatteren. Wij willen dat de verkeersveiligheid in Utrecht en Verwijden beter wordt. Wij zitten nu in de raadzaal en we hebben er allemaal heel veel zin in. Hopelijk gaat het goed.
Welkom hier in het stadhuis, in de zaal van de gemeenteraad.
Ik vond het leukst toen we gingen debatteren. De burgemeester was echt heel cool en grappig. We vonden het heel erg leuk en we vonden het ook wel belangrijk om onze stem te laten horen. 5. We voeren onze plannen uit in de wijk. Wij gaan een speeddate met een andere school uit onze wijk om elkaar beter te leren kennen. We gaan elkaar vragen stellen en wisselen om, zodat elk kind meerdere kinderen spreekt. Er staan veel scholen in Utrecht en deze school is vlakbij onze school. Het zijn eigenlijk onze buren. Een speeddate is eigenlijk een goede manier om elkaar beter te leren kennen. Genoeg redenen waarom de kinderraad belangrijk is. Kom jij ook bij de kinderraad?
So back again. I think this is an example of really, if you look at prevention, how to work on prevention, because I think it's really important that children, they feel connected in their neighborhood and they have a voice, and that we work on strengthened democracy. And of course, if you work on strengthened democracy, there's less radicalization or maybe less polarization, because you feel connected and bonded with democracy. So that's really the way how we work on prevention, and also with all those different stakeholders and partners in the neighborhood. And if you do that in the right way, and I think this is most difficult, and I see this in less, well, not in a lot of neighborhoods, but then you can come to phase 6, and then parties are also prepared to admit each other in their own field for the benefit of that common pedagogical goal. So, for example, it is not only work on shared activities, but also really in different fields. So, for example, in my school there was a youth worker present. So as a youth worker, and also in my role as a teacher, we worked together in all those classes, and we were present in all those classes. But it also works two ways around. So as a teacher, I was also active if it came to, well, organizing a football tournament in the neighborhood, and also be there to be present and to educate children if it comes to that football tournament with all those partners in the neighborhood. And then you are trying to invest in that common goal, but also, well, do it really together. So another example I want to share is I was of course active as a school leader in that neighborhood, and then I heard that one of my students, he stole something from the supermarket, but it was not in school time, of course, it was after school time, but it came to my mind, and I heard the story. So I was talking with my student, and I said, okay, this is what I've heard. I think we have a problem now, and how are we trying to solve this? And then the student said to me, well, it is not your problem because it doesn't happen on the school. It was not in school time. So I think it's not your problem. And I told him, yes, it is my problem because I'm your educator, and you're my student. And every child in this neighborhood, they are my children. So we have to do that in the right way. So, and one of the things we did, we worked really close together with all those youth workers, but also the man in your screen right now, the local police officer, community police. His name was Sjaak. And one of the things is, if you look at a positive social climate, it starts, like Hannah mentioned also, with getting to know each other in a nice way, in a good way. So every child in that neighborhood knows Sjaak from his role as a neighborhood officer, community officer, police officer. So I said, okay, we have to invite Sjaak. I think we have to invite the youth worker and also your parents, because we are all involved, because we work together, and we have to solve this together. And I think this is a nice example of how to do that with all those educators together, and to solve that together. And if it comes to radicalization, which can be pretty tricky or difficult, I think the main challenge is to work on that with all those partners together, so that children, they feel, or young people, they feel we are not alone. There is a way of how to strengthen that social capital in the neighborhood, and we do it together with all those inhabitants and all those parents and all those young people and all those partners. So and of course, as I mentioned before, it can be sometimes really tricky. So of course, when there is an incident, if it comes to radicalization, so I think you also have to tackle with each other, how do we work together if there is radicalization, which partner plays which role, and how do we do that together, and also how do we have to how is our communication? So what is the legislation if it comes to radicalization and working together? I think it's good to talk with each other those kind of difficulties through. And if you do that the right way, I think you can strengthen the cooperation in the neighborhood. So here, as I mentioned before, you can see all those different phases, from phase 1, the separate parties in the neighborhood, towards phase 6, work on a common goal, but also admit each other in their own field of practice. And of course, there are ways in between. And I think it's also good to know that there isn't always a wrong or right. So sometimes in the neighborhood, you really are working on strengthening that cooperation. And sometimes you are in phase 6, and maybe a year later, when there are different partners involved in the neighborhood, or some of the partners are leaving or are moving, or inhabitants are moving, then you can fall back maybe to phase 5 or phase 4. And another thing for me is also, it's never done. So if you look at collaboration, it's never done. So the Peaceable neighborhood, we started it like 12 years ago, and with the Peaceful school in that neighborhood, we started 22 years ago, and it's never done. And I think that's a good thing, because you have to focus on that collaboration, often and every year again and again, and also work with all those different partners in the neighborhood. But it's also a difficult thing because if you look at organization, sometimes they are really committed to shorter goals. So sometimes they look maybe a year ahead or 2 years ahead, but not often 20 years ahead. So there's a big task if you look at how to work with organizations on the longer term. So I think that's also a big challenge if it comes to collaboration in the neighborhood. So if you look at the goal of this presentation, it was how to strengthen that pedagogical cooperation. And of course, I've mentioned some examples and the different phases. And of course, Alan Fraser is also here with us. Oh, let's see. Alan, you are here, and also you were there at a RAN meeting. Maybe you can tell us something first about your school and your role at the school.
Sure, thank you, Dennis. Yes, so Crawford Community College is a secondary school, a very diverse secondary school in West London. We have about 1,500 students, and the area that we live in is faces many challenges, has many vulnerabilities, but we've managed to sort of create a school where children achieve great academic success, and then go on to universities, etc. But about 12 years ago, in fact, almost the same time you were sort of talking about, 12 years ago, we felt that for our children to be really successful, and every school wants their children, their students to be successful, that we couldn't just ignore the other influences on their lives, and including our neighborhoods. If we knew we had a vulnerable neighborhood, and that made our students vulnerable. And so what we did was we sort of reversed it and flipped it, and we said, okay, well, what we need to do is we need to strengthen our community, and in strengthening our community, we can, in actual fact, help our students to be successful. So my job is basically that. I'm a teacher, I'm assistant head teacher, but I spend most of my time in reality actually working outside the school with different partner organizations to promote that strengthening and resilience within the community.
And if you look at that cooperation with all those partners, we've walked through the different stages in today. How do you see your neighborhood and the cooperation in your neighborhood?
Yeah, I mean, I think the things you said at the end, Dennis, about the model are actually really important. It's it's not a linear static model. It's a dynamic model. It moves and shifts, and you will be in different phases and potentially with different groups and different. But as a base sort of model, I think it is very good and very helpful, and it sort of lends. It lends itself to get people going, and I think that's one of the really important things is to get going and not to be deflected by many barriers which can arise.
And can you tell us something about those difficulties or barriers in your community?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest barriers that you do when you get people together, etc., is you are going to have a diverse view, and sometimes you can't take everyone with you on that journey. You might not actually want to sometimes take everyone with you on the journey, but it's in my experience, it's about growing the middle. It's about the creating the critical mass in terms of people participating and coming up with a common goal and what they want to achieve and what they want to believe. And actually, in my experience, what I've found is that people in general have pretty much the same common goals, which is all about around, you know, happiness and well-being in many respects. So these are easier ones, I think, to tap into. And just coming back to the radicalization sort of issue, one of the things which I do think is very important is that you have your networks formed, established, trusted. Trust is so important, so that if something does go wrong, you know that you've got a framework and a network then that can probably, if you like, steady the ship, be calm, be measured, in terms of dealing whatever that crisis is. So I do think, you know, it's worthwhile even starting very simple with just, you know, nice things for people to do, things, common goals that people can really all coalesce around and be happy with, and that's the starting point. And then perhaps looking at some of the more trickier sort of common goals at a later date. But it's about getting started and getting going.
I think that's a good advice. Eh? So you say try to search for a broader common goal maybe, and
Yeah.
if you work longer together, then you can search maybe the more tricky goals and how to cope with that together, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's all about you know, a lot of it in anything in partnership work. It's about building up trust. It's about building up an understanding. I mean, you mentioned, you know, people come from, you know, they have competing interests. They have competing priorities, and it's about making sure that you know, people can, in actual fact, feel that something is worthwhile doing. And that's why I always think it's good to start with something that is simple and can be successful. So the last thing you want is to actually go do something and it's not successful. So I think getting that established and getting success and seeing people seeing how working together they can be successful, I think is very important.
Okay, thank you. And if you look at the Cranford Community College, do you have some good examples if it comes to that collaboration?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we do uh, lots and lots, Dennis. But in terms of collaborations, we sort of one of the things that we're doing now, actually, because it's the school holidays, is we're running an Easter camp program for people, you know, people who are on benefits, etc. But within that, we also have and have targeted young people who have certain vulnerabilities, and we know because we are out in the community, we know those vulnerabilities, and we know the people we need to target, and we know how we can get them to, in actual fact, respond. So for example, we've got a group of young people. We made sure we had a section that was all to do with filmmaking and creating music, because we knew that that's what would actually get them to come into the school during their holidays, which is what's happened. And so it's that collaboration, if you like, between you know, the sort of youth work aspect of it and the education aspect of it and the safeguarding aspect of it, that all come together and help to, you know, protect vulnerable young people.
Okay, thank you for the example. I can imagine that sometimes it can be difficult. I've mentioned before the state of the organization. So how does for example, the management plays a role in this, or the local practitioners, the youth workers? So uh, I can imagine that if I'm a youth worker in a neighborhood and I want to work together with all those different stakeholders, that my manager would say to me, "Oh, Dennis, come on, just focus on your own job as a youth worker. It's not possible to work together with all those different partners in the neighborhood." So, how do you see those situations?
I think what you have to do is, and you know, what we did is if you like, leading these initiatives, is that you've got to get people to buy into your vision and got to understand what the benefit is for them. you know, and I think that's something within any partnership, you know, it has to be a win-win situation. In terms of, you know, it might be a 60-40 win-win-win situation, but it sort of it has to be, you know, your partner has to get something out of it. So actually understanding what motivates your partner is quite important, because clearly, if you know, a partner thinks they're not going to get anything out of it, then they're probably not going to participate.
I think that's also good advice. So always search for that win-win situation.
Yeah.
Okay.
But understand, you know, it's that sort of give and take, you know, but don't lose sight of your you know, what the goal is, what you're trying to achieve. That's if you like, the red line that's going to sort of stay there. But certainly, you know, understand what it is your partner's, what if you like, their motivates them.
Another thing in the neighborhood can also be the focus on repression or prevention if it comes to all those different stakeholders. What would be your advice if it comes to those two kinds of fields, because they also interact towards each other?
Sorry, can you just say that again, Dennis? I didn't quite catch.
The focus on repression and prevention. So, for example, the safety part and the prevention part, if it comes to radicalization. If you look at the collaboration with all those different partners in the neighborhood, and also I think at the Cranford Community College, sometimes, well, I can imagine that it's not always very easy to do that. So what would be your advice if you look at those different partners and cooperation?
Yeah, so particularly on radicalization, what we've looked at is developing peer-to-peer models and social action groups. Young people are very keen on social action, really passionate, and actually, I would say in the last 2 years, a result, I think, of the pandemic, I can never recall a time where young people have really been so passionate about making a difference. And in terms of the peer-to-peer model, I find that actually someone listening to a peer, or maybe, you know, a little bit older than them, is far more effective than an old person like myself. I'll be polite. Sort of talking to them, and they can have the dialogues and discussions. So I mean, those are things that we've had in place sort of prior, and increasingly now as we come out of the pandemic, we've got running, and there's a genuine thirst for it. In fact, it's almost I'm struggling to keep up with for the demands, but yes. So I hope that answers the questions.
Okay, thank you. Of course, today there's also public, so I'm going to stop to share my presentation now. I can imagine that that you as an audience also experience sometimes some challenges in the neighborhood, and we have a Q&A, so maybe you can type your challenges in the Q&A, and maybe Alan and also me, maybe we can interact if it comes to those challenges. Let's see. Oh yeah, let's see. Is there a question?
Yeah, can you see them?
Yeah, now I can see it. I'm not a teacher. However, I do come from a family of academics and educators. So I would like to ask, what would you recommend to influential primary school teacher communities in Eastern Europe? Wow, yeah. Well, I think if it comes to citizenship, because this is really about citizenship, there are two things if it comes to citizenship. The first thing is, in a democratic society, there's always diversity, and indeed, maybe not from a racial or another standpoint, but it also can be if you look at the war, indeed, or refugees. So I think it's good to interact with young children if it comes to that diversity, and also search for those kind of specific situations. But if you want to search for those kind of conflicts, the first thing is to work on a positive social climate in your classroom as a teacher or in the neighborhood. So the focus should be, I think, to establish that climate. And if you have that positive social climate, of course, I think it's the challenge to always interact and always search for those more difficult situations, and also in your own neighborhood. So every neighborhood or situation is different. So if there are some problems with refugees, for example, I think it's good to interact with children if it comes to that kind of problems, and also make them maybe aware from the different perspectives in it, and that maybe there's not always a wrong or right. Maybe there is sometimes, but not always. You have to talk with them. How do they think towards all those different problems that there are, and also involve them in maybe try to work on a small solution from a, we call it in Dutch, I will say it in English, of course, but pedagogical hope. So give them a message of hope. Yes, there is a war, but you can also act to make the world a bit better. So for example, if I look at my oldest son, he is 9 years old. He's now selling bracelets, and he's collecting money to send it to Ukraine to help refugees, for example. So even from a child's perspective, you can give them a role in making their world a bit better. So that would be my answer, but I don't know how you see it, Alan.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's certainly the stance we've taken is very much about the humanitarian aspect of it. Because obviously, you know, we have students from Ukraine, we have students from Russia here as well, so that adds an extra dimension to it. But clearly, and I think that, you know, taking a humanitarian approach to it, I think is good, particularly for younger children. They can relate to it and they can see it, and you know, we should be encouraging everyone to adopt that and educating them about it. So I think it's a good approach, right approach.
Okay, and I also see another question from Irene. How much is the participation of parents, especially Dutch, because grown-up people have more prejudice? Yeah, indeed, that is really a big thing, of course, and that's also why our focus, if you look at the Peaceable School or Peaceable Neighborhood, is really on children, because they are often more open towards the world. But of course, parents also are educators. They educate their own children, and so I think you always have to search how to interact or work together with parents, or involve them if it comes to the Peaceable Neighborhood. But indeed, that's not often very easy, because they have more prejudice. So I can imagine that is more difficult. But also youth workers or teachers, they can have more prejudice also. So I think it's good to be aware of that, and to search for systems that you can interact with each other and with all those different visions. Or yeah, I think that would be my answer. I don't know, how do you see it, Alan?
Yeah, I think obviously parents are critical, and I know from one of the projects I worked on, we had a great deal of difficulty actually connecting with parents. But what we used children as, if you like, the hook to get their parents involved, doing different things, which allowed us then to start to have some dialogue with parents. Yeah, I think that's a good way. It's particularly an issue more in secondary schools and primary schools. Parents tend to be more involved in primary education. I don't know what it's like, but when they get to secondary age, it's like, okay, you're grown up, off you go, bye. And so that engagement certainly changes. But you know, we do involve parents, and we do have their views, listen to their views, and in fact we have a coming up in the summer, we have what we call a community conference, which is actually setting the vision for the school and the neighbourhoods for the next 10 years. And that will involve many parties. That's what I'm going to invite you, Dennis, to. And
Great.
but it involves many parties: parents, local residents, community, police, all the different services, community groups, etc., so that we actually come together, and actually create a shared vision.
Yeah, nice example. I think that's also very important to create a shared vision and also involve parents in it. And I think in every neighborhood or in every school, there are parents who want to invest in their children and in the school and in their neighborhood. So I think it's also a good thing to search for that positive energy and positive people who want to make their world a bit better. So and of course there are always more perspectives, and if I come to a difficult neighborhood, there are always some people who say to me, "Oh, you're too soft," or "This doesn't work over here." And of course that's also a perspective. But if you invest on all those positive parents who want to invest in their neighborhood, I think that can also be a solution. I see Puma nodding. Okay. I think there aren't any questions left in the chat, isn't it?
There is one.
Yeah, Oni, I think.
Yeah.
How about the most vulnerable youths who need lots of support? How you ensure their participation? Yeah, I think that's a really good question, because if you look at democratic citizenship and how do we involve children in schools or in neighborhoods, sometimes the children who are involved are the children who need it less instead of those vulnerable youth. So, for example, children who like to talk about improving their neighborhood, they are a part of the children committee. And it's also in democracy. If you look at the parliament here in the Netherlands, the people in the parliament are mostly from a university, and they know how to speak on the right level, but they are making decisions about people who live in the more vulnerable areas, for example. So I think if it comes to working together with children in the neighborhood or in schools, you have to think about how do we involve the more vulnerable children, and how can we learn them that they have a voice also, and they can improve their neighborhood also. And there are different ways. So for a thing we did in the past was organize elections at schools. But a negative thing about elections is that people, young children who get elected are mostly elected because they know how to use their voice and they know how to pronounce things right. And you want to also reach out to the more vulnerable youth. So a thing we are now doing in the city of Utrecht is not only election, but also a lottery. So and the good thing about a lottery, so choose children by chance, is that also the more vulnerable children, they can play a role in the children committees in the neighborhood, for example. So I think that's a really good question, and I think you have to be aware that those processes are happening in schools. Yeah. How do you see it, Alan?
Yeah, no, I think it is a really good question, and in many ways it cuts to the whole point. Is a lot of you create opportunities, and where they're self-selecting, it will be those who probably have the least need who actually will put themselves forward, if you like. And that's where you have to target, and you have to persuade, and you have to have people that have relationships with them to persuade them, not just actually persuade them. Quite often it's their parents that you have to persuade, almost more than the child themselves. We're talking about young people here, and I class 18 to 24-year-olds as young people as well. And we've started to do some work with them on a mentoring program, which links in with some volunteering opportunities and some sort of masterclasses. And we're targeting and we're using the people that run the social security, so do the sort of payments for those who are unemployed. We're targeting them through them. In fact, they're sponsoring this program because they're interested to see how this could potentially work. So I think the key message I would say is you have to be selective in some ways and say, no, I think you should be doing this as well, and these are the reasons why.
Yeah, nice.
And you have to make it attractive for them to do it as well. You know,
Indeed.
hence, like I was saying about the filmmaking and the music.
Well, it's also, if you look at involving young people, sometimes if you look at our educational system, the children who are good in, for example, mathematics or Dutch language, sometimes teachers say, "Oh, you can skip those lessons and you can be a part of the children committee." But there's also a thing in it, because children, they learn a lot in those children's committees. If it comes to language and if it comes to behavior and if it comes to making democratic decisions together. So there's also a thing in how do we educate our teachers in making the right decisions and sending out children to those children committees. So there's also a thing, I think, in our educational system.
Yeah, and just one last thing that we do is we do monitor so opportunities. For example, we've just had an Erasmus trip go to Italy, and we ensured that it reflected the population in terms of ethnicity within the school, and I think that can be quite important as well.
Thank you. I can also see, I don't know if you can see it, but it's a personal question, I think, but I will share it. Dennis, were you a STEM teacher? So it is science, technology, engineering, mathematics. No, I wasn't. I was a teacher at a primary school, and here in the Netherlands, as a primary school teacher, you have all those things. So yes, indeed, mathematics, but also Dutch language. And I think if it comes to democratic citizenship or involve children, I think every teacher plays a role in it. So also a mathematics teacher, because in your mathematics lessons, there can also be children who are vulnerable for radicalization, for example. So the world around us is coming in your classroom. So from my perspective or vision, every teacher plays a role in it. And sometimes, well, if I look at the Dutch educational system, there's a really big focus on the yields, and that makes that sometimes specific teachers, like, well, STEM teachers, are more involved in their own subject instead of the bigger themes as in citizenship or your pedagogical practice. So let's see. I don't see, there aren't any questions left, I think. So
No, I don't think so. So I guess then we have come to the end of the webinar. Ellen or Dennis, is there anything you would like to share, or a last tip or a recommendation? Or
I just wish everyone good luck and
yeah.
and say, you know, it is worth doing. It is hard work, but it is worth doing. The outcomes are great.
Those were some nice last words. Yeah, thank you.
good. Well, thank you both a lot for sharing your experiences and know-how with all of us today. And of course, also to everyone listening in, thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed it and that it was useful for you. And in the chat, you have now just seen appearing a link to the survey. So we would very much appreciate if you could fill that in, and we can use the outcomes. So yeah, that was it for today. Thank you, and I wish everyone a very nice day and hope to see you again. Bye bye.
Bye.